All right, here we are with our last segment for Monday, March 30th for MARC 569. So, this last segment, we're going to talk about construction contract administration. So, or as folks usually say, CA. And a lot of times they say construction administration, and actually it's contract administration, but you're administrating the contract for construction. Yeah, it's confusing enough, I know. Yeah, so this goes through the CA phase. So this is the point where you've done the drawings and project manual, you've bid it out, you've got a contractor selected, and now they're going to start construction. So, this is how everybody thinks an architect is during construction, right? That's like the stereotypical image, and you think you're just, really awesome during construction and you know exactly what's going on. But really you find out, man, half the time I don't even know because I'm an architect and I've not built a lot of these things. And so I'm frustrated that, maybe things didn't work out quite like I planned or, uh, you know, uh, something happened on site or they did something wrong, and it can just be really frustrating. But why do we provide construction contract administration as an architect? And the main reason is to get what you designed built and built correctly. And so that's the main reason why the architect is even involved in construction. And then also we are acting as an agent of the owner to be able to make sure that what is designed and in the contract documents gets built. So just from a contractual standpoint, this goes through what we're really required to do is that we have to administrate the contract between the owner and the contractor, along with the A201 documents, which is the general conditions for construction contract for construction, excuse me, and that we act as an agent of the owner during construction, and we're acting on their best behalf in their best interests. So here are the typical activities that you see during construction as required by the contract. The first is to observe the construction work for conformance with the drawings and specifications. This includes, usually participating in regular owner architect site meetings, and then they usually follow up on those observation site meetings with documentation in the form of a field report, documenting the things that you observed on site. You will process the contractor's shop drawings, product data, and samples. You have asked for those in your specifications typically, and so you will be reviewing those and taking action. You'll be responsible for reviewing the results of the construction test and inspections. And these include things like adhesion test reports for joint sealants and the 28-day concrete strength testing. Now, just because you're responsible for it doesn't mean that you are actually doing all of that. For instance, on the 28-day concrete breaks, you're going to forward those to your structural engineer, who is a subconsultant of yours, right? To review those and advise. You will be evaluating the contractor's request for payment, also known as an application for payment, which is a fancy word for a bill. You will be handling the request for changes during construction, which includes preparation of contract modification documents. You will be responsible for addressing and to resolve claims brought by the owner or the contractor. Remember, we talked about the architect being the initial decision maker. So anytime somebody has a claim, whether any of those three parties, the owner, the architect, or the contractor, it's your responsibility to make an initial decision on that. You're responsible for what's called a punch list. A punch list is a contractor term, or it's an industry term, for reviewing observing the work on site for conformance with the contract documents. You will be reviewing the closeout documents. So also in your project manual, you have specified the documents that the contractor shall submit at the end of the project. Those include things like O&M manuals. And so O&M manuals are operation and maintenance manuals, which will be 3-ring binders for all of the pieces, parts, systems of the building that outline each system, how to maintain it, what all the parts are, operation of it, testing, inspection, those sorts of things. You will be responsible for making sure that the contractor schedules any necessary training for the owner, right? So there may be training on special systems or equipment or whatever that requires the owner to learn more about the operation of that particular item. If you have a chiller, what are the correct startup and shutdown procedures for the chiller? Ensuring insurance and utility changeover. So the contractor has been carrying, insurance and probably paying utilities. All that needs to be changed over to the owner, making sure that that happens. On public jobs, you'll be making sure that you are forwarding the payroll reports from the contractor to the owner regarding their documentation on prevailing wage and making sure that they meet the wage requirements that are set forth. That varies not only the laws governing prevailing wage are different state by state, and then additionally the wage that's charged for that is different county by county. So it gets even more granular than that. Finalizing outstanding contract modification documents, making sure that all of the documents that you've issued during construction are signed and properly executed by all the parties. And then receiving all of the final lien waivers, making sure that none of the subcontractors or the general contractor have any lien rights on the owner's property because the owner has paid for everything that's due to those subcontractors and general contractors. You will be responsible for processing the final request for payment. That will be the final bill from the contractor that takes the value down to zero. You will be responsible for providing record documents based on the as-built documents provided by the contractor. That's oftentimes an optional additional service that you will include that, as the construction goes along, the contractor will be marking up drawings on the as-built conditions, and then they will give that to you at the end of the job. Sometimes you will just simply hand those documents over to the owner. Sometimes the owner will pay you to take that information, make modifications to the contract documents so that those can be used as the record documents of the building going forward. And lastly, another responsibility that you're often responsible for is observing the building for the first year services related to warranty items. So, excuse me, typically what you require of the general contractor is a 1-year warranty on their work. Now, there may be other systems or materials that have a much longer warranty, which is fine. Roof may have a 20-year warranty. Great. But this is for the general contractor warranting their work for the first year. So typically at month 10.5 or 11, you will send an email to the owner and the contractor and says, hey, we are approaching 1 year from substantial completion. It's time we do a walkthrough of the building and make sure that we have identified anything that is not operating properly or anything that is not performing as expected, so that we can be sure and continue to use the general contractor's services to fix those items. So for instance, if there's a roof leak that just has not been resolved, and you do the 1-year walkthrough, that's noted, the general contractor then is still responsible for working with the roofing subcontractor to make sure that those items are resolved, and that way the owner doesn't have to work directly with the roofing contractor. So it's really important to be proactive during construction contract administration. And in order to do that, though, you've got to make sure that construction contract administration is included in your agreement. This is often, while it seems like a no-brainer, it's actually often tougher than you might think. A lot of times, particularly with owners that are either very experienced or very inexperienced, they just see that as more cost from you as the designer, right? They don't see the value or the benefit that the designer provides during construction. And so a lot of times they'll say, oh, we don't need that. We'll just, if we need you, we'll call you and we'll pay you hourly. If you have an experienced client that, is capable of managing the construction, and who has a lot of experience in the construction industry, it's typically okay. Where I get particularly nervous is when you have an inexperienced client who doesn't want to do that, and then they end up making a lot of bad decisions. They're like, oh, the architect, didn't do that because, or, I know they put that in there, that extra door, but we don't want that. We don't want that door in there. And then they come back and, the city does, or, the authority having jurisdiction does their inspection. They say, hey, that door's not there. You need that by egress. And so all of a sudden the owner's in a real lurch because they've directed the contractor to get rid of a door to save, $800. But the reality of it is now it's $1,500 to cut it in where it should have been originally where you showed it. And so, there's a lot of things that could go wrong if you are not doing construction contract administration. And so it's really important that you have those conversations with your client when you're preparing either proposal, even, way before you even put pen to paper, making sure that you're on the same page on how construction is going to be procured and administrated. Being an effective communicator is really important, right? And we talked about that, and being an empathetic listener. We also talked about, things don't always go right, and so it's important to take care of your owner's lost luggage and make sure that everybody's on the same page and knows what is expected, both the owner and the contractor. It's important to be a team player. The design, bid, build, contract structure is inherently adversarial, right? Because there's no contract between the owner and the architect and the contractor, and so both are independently contracted with the owner. As a result, it's kind of set up where the contractor wants to take the path of least resistance, get it constructed as cheaply as possible to save money on their end and maximize profit. Whereas you're concerned about, achieving the owner's desired result and your desired result as communicated in contract documents. So there's an inherent conflict of interest there. But it's important to work as a team to solve problems. It's important that as the architect you realize that you don't have all the answers, and that you need to rely on the expertise of the contractors, the folks that build these things every day, but be also able to effectively communicate what you or the owner want to achieve out of a particular detail, or whatever it is. And then maintain good relationships. Even when things get heated, or you see things a different way, or you note things on a field report that's not compliant, make sure that you do that and say, hey, I noticed this wasn't, I'm getting ready to send out this field report. I noticed that this wasn't in compliance, but here are some things I think you could do, Mr. or Mrs. Contractor, and here are some things I think you can do to correct it. It'll be fairly easy, straightforward, and we can move on. And then that way you can foster some goodwill among the project. So before you start contract administration, there are some things that you'll want to do. Is you want to make sure that you review the project agreements and the documents, right? And make sure that you understand, what everybody is required to do by contract and by document. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you, at least internally, set up a project database of all the contacts to make sure that you can be able to contact everybody when you need to during construction. The other thing is make sure that you've got a project directory. Make sure that that's both, on your side as the architect, make sure all your documents are up to date as well as that database. Verify your team's assignments, make sure that everybody on your team, all your consultants, you meet with them and make sure that everybody knows what their responsibilities are. And then make sure that you're involved with the pre-construction conference that the contractor will conduct. So we talked about, your typical responsibilities during construction. Here are some particular activities, right? So you'll be managing changes in the work. As much as you have planned, prepared, designed during when you were doing your documents, things you're going to have to change your documents. There are things that are going to have to change. And so you'll be managing those changes as the architect in the contract documents. So it's important that you know that you're going to have to be involved in recording those changes and issuing supplemental contract documents. Excuse me, you're going to be managing submittals. So in your specifications, you have requested all of these different submittals to be submitted for each scope of work. And so you're going to have lots of them coming in, and then you're going to be sending them back out. You will be responding to requests for information, or RFIs. So there will be times when a subcontractor is reviewing the documents, there's something that may be inconsistent, or they don't understand, or they don't know where to find it, or whatever. They'll submit that to the general contractor, and the contractor will submit that to you as a request for information. Once you receive that, you are asked to respond to that, and you send that back out. Sometimes you will respond to a request for information with a supplemental contract document that changes the contract documents in order to address the contractor's question or concern. You're going to be asked to problem solve every day. And just like you are in design, during construction, it doesn't change. You'll be asked to do site visits, right? And that can vary on the size and scale and location of the project. Oftentimes it coincides with your monthly review of the application for payment. You may be asked to attend project meetings. Sometimes you'll be having meetings that aren't necessarily on site, but they will be what are called OAC calls or meetings, owner, architect, contractor meetings during construction, which could occur, weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. You'll be asked to certify applications for payment. So applications for payment, or pay apps, are essentially a bill from the contractor to the owner. And your responsibility is to certify that the amount that they are requesting on that pay app is commensurate with the work in place and stored materials on site that the contractor is reporting. So what happens is let's say a building costs $1 million, right? The contract is $1 million. The owner doesn't write $1 million check to the contractor and then they go build it. What happens is they buy it in pieces for the work that is complete, or the materials that have been purchased and stored on site but not yet installed. So what that means is that the owner buys the building, in increments as they go through the project, in monthly increments. And so that invoice will vary in amount because the work in place changes every month. And so when you get the pay app, they'll say, concrete is 75% complete. Your site observations need to go out, when you go out, be able to confirm, yeah, I believe that the contractor is 75% complete with the concrete. And so that's where you do those, and you balance that out for your owner and the contractor. And then once you believe that everything's in line, you'll sign it and submit that to the owner. The owner will then take that and pay the contractor. And then the contractor will take most of that money and then pay their subcontractors. Then substantial completion. you'll be asked to confirm the date of substantial completion. The contractual term or definition of substantial completion is when the building is substantially complete that the owner can use the building for its intended use, right? So there may be areas where they have to touch up paint, or they have to adjust a closer on a door, or they need to test and balance the HVAC, but the owner can use it, right? They can move in and they can use the building for its intended use. That is an important date because that's the date at which most warranties take effect, and is the date that you'll be used for that 12-month clock for the contractor's warranty. There's a lot of things that lead up to that, and making sure that you have that, and that your punch list typically coincides with the substantial completion. To confirm or to put the substantial completion date in ink, so to speak, you will prepare a document called a certificate of substantial completion that will list any outstanding items, also known as your punch list, and any closeout items that are remaining by the general contractor. And so you will issue that as the date of substantial completion with any outstanding items, right? And then the contractor will correct those items or submit all of the final closeout documentation, and then they will submit a final payout, and then you will go back out and confirm final completion of the project and make sure that you conduct all the closeout activities. So, managing changes in the work. There will be changes in the work, and those changes are typically caused by changes initiated by the contractor, changes due to non-conforming work, changes due to errors and omissions, value analysis induced changes, or product substitutions. So changes initiated by the contractor, they may say, hey, look, I know you've designed spread footings, but it's this particular subcontractor, it's going to be easier for them to do grade beams. Can we do that? And everybody says yes, and the structural engineer may have to do a slight modification to their design. That gets issued, and so there you go. You designed it one way, the contractor wants to do it a different way, nobody has a problem with it, so you do that. Changes due to non-conforming work. You may go out on site, or the general contractor may recognize a subcontractor has done work that is not in conformance with the contract documents, and so that may incite changes to the contract documents in order to accommodate the non-conforming work. There may be changes due to errors and omissions by the design team. So we are human, we are not perfect, and we will have errors and omissions, and there's oftentimes when we need to go back and correct our documents in order to compensate for the errors and omissions. There may be VE items, or value analysis or value engineering items. So after it's bid, there may be a period where you go through a value engineering process where the owner says, hey, if we go from this material to this material, this glazing to this glazing, you won't have the same energy performance, but it won't impact HVAC, and we can save, $50,000. And so that may be something that you end up changing. So you'll change your documents in order to ultimately, hopefully, save the owner some money. And then the last item there, product substitutions. Similar sort of process where you may design or specify around a particular product, and then the contractor says, hey, if you go to this product, it's not what you designed around, but it's equivalent, and we can save money if we move to this product. So what do these changes look like in terms of the actual documents? So there's 4 main documents that I want you to know. Excuse me. First one is a supplemental instruction. Okay, this is really additional information for the contractor, and there are no changes. The result of this information does not change the contract time or the contract amount, right? And so if there's no change to the contract time or amount, it is simply supplemental instruction or supplemental information to the contractor. As a result, because it does not change any of the contract time or amounts, it is signed only by the architect and the contractor. In other words, both the architect and the contractor agree that this information exists. It is additional information, and that's it. You can do a proposal request. A proposal request for a change that may affect contract time or amount, but does not actually change the contract. So this is really a proposal request where you want to know, all right, the owner would like to look at, let's see, I'm trying to think of a recent example. The owner on a project wanted to change from around the pool that I'm on a project I'm working on. They wanted to change the pilasters between the fence sections around the pool from being wrapped in stone to being wrapped in tile instead. And so we issued that to the contractor that said, hey, give us a cost to omit the stone and do this particular tile that the owner selected to do around these pilasters. So the contractor sends that out to their subcontractors, and they've got 14 days to compile that information and get it back to you that says, hey, if we switch from the stone to the tile, it will be an additional cost of $500. And so the owner can say, yes, I want to do that, or no, I don't. And if it's yes, then you will issue a change order, which is the last item on this slide. And that modifies the contract time or the amount or both, right? So you would do a change order for an additional $500 on the contract amount. If the owner says, no, I don't want to do that, then it just goes away. You haven't modified any contract documents. It stays as it is. And then the last, and so the proposal request doesn't, because it's not, it doesn't change anything. It's just asking for a proposal. It doesn't have to be signed by anybody. The contract change directive says, look, it's kind of like a proposal request, only we don't have time to go through this process, or we know that we want to do it regardless of what it costs or the impacts on time. We know we need to do this. So this just says do it, right? And do it for the amount of time and materials it takes. So whatever it costs, not an open book, but I mean open checkbook, but whatever the costs are is the costs, and any time, if it takes 2 extra days, then we'll add that on. And so that does change the contract time and amount. We just don't know what it is yet, right? And so as a result, we're changing the contract time and or cost. And so it has to be signed by all 3 parties, the architect, the owner, and the contractor. And so a change order is exactly the same, only you have probably gotten a proposal request, or you've defined something else out beforehand in terms of what that modification to the contract is. And again, a change order is signed by all 3 parties, the architect, the owner, and the contractor. Submittals. So managing submittals, they come in, submittals are the hot potato because you don't want those in your lap for very long. And typically by contract, we allow for 14 days. And so that's what we ask the contractor to allow us for each submittal, right? 14 days. Rarely do we get 14 days. Most of the time they send it to you and say, hey, I need this back as soon as possible. Because time is everything, right? And so that's why you don't want these on your desk. So it's important that you review these submittals as soon as they come in. So you need to make sure that you allot yourself time during construction because you don't always know when they're going to come in. And so make sure you allot yourself time to be able to review those when they come in. You need to track them, right? It's really important that you know what has come in, when it came in, what action you took, and when it went out back to the contractor. Because you don't want to be the one responsible for a delay in the project, adding, I got to add a week to the project because the architect took 3 weeks to review the elevator submittal. You don't want that on you, because that could be a breach of duty then, and so you could be held responsible for that. So when you receive these, you will typically take one of these 4 actions on it. You will either do no exceptions taken, make corrections noted, revise and resubmit, or reject it. So no exceptions taken means is a different way of saying it's approved. But rather than approved, you're saying I don't take any exception to it. And it's really a contractual term, because regardless of what action you take on the submittal, the contractor is still responsible for complying with the contract documents. So as a result, it's really important that you don't say, oh, I approve this, because you could be approving something that is in conflict with the contract documents. So you're just saying, I don't take any exceptions to it. You could mark it as make corrections noted, which you may mark notations on there, so fix this, fix this, fix this, or provide this additional information, and then you send it back. And what that means is that, hey, you're okay to go with this. I don't have any exceptions except for the corrections that I've noted on there. They may submit something and it's like, man, there's so many things that are inconsistent with the contract documents. I really need you to revise this resubmittal and send it back to me so that I can review it again. And so that's a revise and resubmit. But you'll want to tell them exactly what you need back, so that there's, don't make them guess. Let them know exactly what it is that you're looking for. And then the last item, rejection, is simply, it's maybe a material that is not approved or allowed by the contract, or it's the wrong system, or the contractor hasn't reviewed it yet, and so you just simply reject it. When you prepare your specifications, there's 2 different kinds of submittals. There's action submittals and informational submittals. Action submittals are ones that you have to take action on, as one of those 4 actions we just discussed. The other one is an informational submittal, and so that may be contractor qualifications. You ask for the contractor qualifications to be submitted, but you don't need to say no exceptions taken or make corrections noted, right? It's just information that can be put on the file then, in terms of that they've complied with that. And note that you may require the contractor to submit several submittals concurrently, because you'll want to review them at the same time. And so that means you're trying to look at 2 or 3 different systems, and you'll ask for those to be submitted concurrently, so that you can look at all those submittals together, rather than piecemealing it weeks and weeks apart. Site visits. So your agreement with the owner will define the frequency that you plan to do site visits. Not that you couldn't do more or possibly less, but typically in your agreement you're going to identify, hey, I've got 8 site visits in my contract. You want to make sure that you're prepared for your visit before you go out. And by preparing, I mean, it's important that you know where they're at on the project, and that you review the documents beforehand to make sure that you're zeroed in on the right information. So usually before I go out to do a site visit, I will call the superintendent and I'll say, hey, I'm going to be out next Friday. What work is going on site? Are there any issues that you've got coming up that you specifically want me to look at? And then so by just talking to them and getting an understanding of where they're at, you'll say, okay, I really need to review these 5 sections, because that's the work that's going on, specification sections. I want to review these details and and these wall sections, because that's the work that's going on right now, so that you're prepared when you go out there and you can be most efficient on site. It's often beneficial too, if you can, to have a half-size set and or a project manual that you can take out on site that you can review things as well. You've heard me say observe several times during this lecture, and that's important to note that when you are out there, you are observing the site. And this is a contractual term, and it is a term that your E&O insurer and liability insurer will want you to use. You do not inspect the project site. You do not review the project site. You do not certify anything on the project site. You are observing. And so what that means, the flexibility that allows you as the architect is that you are making observations, right? And you may not observe something. There may be something on site, a problem that occurs later in the project or even after it's open, and they say, well, why didn't you catch that on site? Well, I didn't observe that on site. There's no way that you can possibly catch everything, and so that's why it's important that you always use the word observe or observations, and that your observations are only for the work, checking the work for compliance with the contract documents. It's kind of like just keeping score, right? So you've got your contract documents, and when you go out on site, it either is, it complies with the contract documents, or it doesn't, and that's all you're being asked to do. This last sentence is not really a sentence. Boy, I worded that poorly. It says thee shall not. You shall not comment on the contractor's means and methods for construction. Sorry about that, guys. The point of this sentence is that the contractor is responsible for the means and methods in which all of that work takes place on site. You never want to say, hey, I don't know why you're installing this now. It needs to be installed, later after this stuff. Look, they're responsible for the means and methods. If you make a comment like that, either verbally out on site or in your field report, you open yourself up for all kinds of liability if something goes wrong and say, well, the contractor or the architect said to do it like this, install it in this manner. Well, you don't want that responsibility, trust me. And then make sure you follow up with your visit with a field observation report. Applications for payment. So we've kind of talked about this already, but yeah, they're going to submit to you a form, and they usually use the AIA document G702, and it includes the value of each line item. So like concrete, structural steel, steel joists, wood framing, all those things, and it lists the value of that line item. And then there will be another column that lists the work in place, right? How much of that section of work, that scope of work, is in place on site. The next column will be stored materials. And so those are stored materials on site. Now, it's possible that the contractor may want to store materials off-site. The problem with that is that's not covered by any of the contractor's insurance, and it's not covered by any of the owner's insurance. So all of a sudden, the subcontractor could buy something, bill for it, the owner would pay for it, but it never showed up on site. It's still sitting in the subcontractor's warehouse, and so one, it's not insured, and two, it could be that ends up getting used for another project, and then all of a sudden the subcontractor runs out of money or something, and then no longer has that product to be able to use for the project. And while that sounds far-fetched, it actually, I've seen it happen before. And so if there's an instance where materials must be stored off-site, it's important that you, as the architect, obtain pictures of where it's stored and the address that it's stored at. Two, that the subcontractor or supplier has a separate insurance certificate listing the owner as the beneficiary for those items. Uh, because if you don't have those two things, or the third thing you could do is that you go out and observe it, and you want it to be segregated from all of the other materials that are in that same storage area, whatever that storage area is. Um, and so it's best to not approve any stored materials offsite, but in a pinch, those are things to consider. The next column on the pay app will be the balance to finish, and then any retainage. I don't think we've talked about retainage yet. So retainage is a process in which the owner retains some of the value that's complete as an assurance, not insurance, but assurance that the general contractor will complete their work. So how that works is most of the time how it works is that let's say the contractor submits an application for $500,000, right, for that month. The owner will pay 90% of that. So they will pay $450,000, and $50,000 or 10% of that will be retained as retainage. And the owner will not pay that last 10% until substantial completion or till that work is complete. And so that's just an added way that the owner can use to make sure at the end of the job they've still got 10% there that they can use as a hammer to be able to ensure that the general contractor completes their work. The application for payment is one of the few documents that we as architects actually certify. And so when you sign it and date it, you are actually certifying that amount. It's one of the few times we actually do something like that. And so that's an important distinction there. And typically your pay apps are accompanied by a field report because, I mean, how else are you going to know what work is complete unless there is a site observation in order to see how much of that work is complete? Okay, substantial completion. So we talked about what that definition was, and so the work or that designated portion is sufficiently complete for an owner to occupy or use that structure for its intended use. And typically, in order to confirm, you will have a site observation punch list. But before you go out to do your punch list, you will ask the contractor to submit their punch list of incomplete items before the walkthrough so that you can review those. Some general contractors are really good at it, some aren't. I just did a punch list for a project and I asked for the contractor to submit their punch list before I went out there, and it was the punch list was like install flooring on first floor, install millwork on first floor. I mean, it was just finish guest rooms. It was just ridiculous. I mean, it wasn't anything specific. Usually it's really specific, but it comes in various forms. And then you will take that punch list and through your site observations, do your punch list and add additional deficiencies or defects to the list that they need to correct. And then it's up to you to assess a value that corresponds with the incomplete items. And typically what the general conditions state is that you can withhold up to 3 times that determined value out of the application for payment, out of that retainage usually. And so that's important to note. And then typically the punch list and substantial completion requires that the contractor obtain a certificate of occupancy from the authority having jurisdiction, which means they have a building inspector come out and do their walkthrough, in addition to all the walkthroughs for other life safety systems like fire sprinkler, fire alarm system, all those sorts of electrical, everything. So you've done your substantial completion, You submit your punch list of all the things that are out there, and then the contractor goes and works on that punch list to correct those items, and then they ask you to come back out for final completion. They say we are 100% completely done, and here's our final application for payment, which takes the contract amount that's due to us down to zero. It's all of the contract amount. And so you will do a site observation to determine, to make sure that they have gotten all that done. And then that will also require that they have submitted all of their final closeout items. And that typically includes, in addition to the punch list, submittal of the project record documents, any extra materials. So like you may specify carpet and you may say, hey, look, in addition to the carpet specified, and what gets installed, there needs to be 5% extra that the owner will store and retain in case, they get a stain or whatever. And so some material, those are usually related to finishes, those extra materials. So it's usually stuff like carpet, paint, ceiling tiles, stuff like that, the owner will want that exact color match, or those exact ceiling tiles or whatever, in case they need to replace something out. Submission of the O&M manuals like we talked about, and all of the final warranties and all that kind of stuff. So again, we'll meet on Monday night, and we'll go through any questions you might have over this. I am hopeful that doing the lectures in this format and reducing the amount of time on Zoom will be good for us. So we'll see how this goes. I hope it works, guys. Thanks.